Okay, so we are recording our, what shall I say it, our final episode. It is not our last. um, so yeah, my name is Ashley O'Hara. I'm the curator at the Crested Butte Museum. If some of you are new to the series. And tonight we are going to talk, well, Duane is going to talk about Colorado history, 1900 to the present. And this is wrapping up a 12-week session here, and we'll be starting a new one January 20th. So be on the lookout for information about that. Before I start off with anything, though, I am going to start the evening by giving a land acknowledgement. The museum recognizes that we are guests here on this land, historically Ute territory. We acknowledge that the Uncompahgre Ute and the Tabewash Ute were forcibly removed from this area due to the Brno Treaty. We hope that you will take time to visit our neighbor museum, the Ute Museum in Montrose, Colorado, with exhibits developed in partnership with Ute Tribes by History Colorado, our state historic society. And while we can never do this history justice, we do include information here at the Crested Butte Museum about Paleo Indians of the Gunnison Valley, the Ute people, the Brno Treaty, and the Los Pinos Indian Agency in our exhibits. Other ways to support Indigenous peoples of today and the past is to go beyond the land acknowledgement that I'm doing here. Please consider taking steps towards allyship and reconciliation by conducting your own research of the Indigenous groups that were forcibly removed from the areas within where you live. In your own community, you can be visiting local Indigenous museums, cultural centers, and reading literature from Indigenous writers. On another note, we also hope that you will consider becoming members or making a donation to the Crested Butte Museum to support this program and then future programs like we'll have in January 20th. And then we also have our History at Home series that will be starting up mid-March. That will include historians from the Valley, various topics. And also just all the work that we do here at the museum. We are a nonprofit. You can do that by visiting our website at crested-butte-museum.com or calling us here at the museum. The museum right now is actually closed. We are closed Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursdays. We're open Friday through Monday, 11 to 5. If you would like a private tour, just give us a call at 970-349-1880. Keep in mind, we have a lot of events coming up this winter, actually, and you might not remember these, but I'll just throw them out. We have the polka party. It's going to be so much fun. We're going to have drinks and some light appetizers. That will be December 21st. We're also actually, I think it's next Monday or the Monday after, November 30th, the Brick Oven Pizzeria in Crested Butte is hosting a trivia night. And the funds that they make from that partially will go to the Crested Butte Museum. So if you're in town in Crested Butte and you're really good at trivia, you should go to the Brick to support us. January 20th, Duane's series will be starting up again. This time it will be on Crested Butte history. And January 30th and January 30th and March 17th, the Crested Butte Museum is going to work together with the Nordic Center and do a yurt trip. So you could snowshoe or you can cross-country ski, and you can, I think you would start at the Nordic Center and go out to the hut the yurt, that's over by Peanut Lake. There you'll have a history tour. And then also February 9th, we are also doing a Nordic ski from 10 to 2 with the Crested Butte Land Trust, and we will cover topics such as Smith Hill, the Peanut Mine, Peanut Lake, and some other historical goodies. We are going to roast Duane February 17th at the Center for the Arts. It is going to be an amazing night. Here, the ladies have been working really hard on getting a lot of activities. So Duane, get ready for that. And then we also have our pub crawl, which will be February 20th. So lots of stuff going on, and this will all be posted on our Instagram, our Facebook, and our newsletter that you can sign up for. This program is being recorded. Oh, I should show you guys before. We got these sweet new hats in. Melinda was rocking hers today. She looked pretty good. Yeah, they're pretty nice. They're handmade from a company called Dead Miners, and we're gonna have beanies for sale too. This comes in black as well. So just kind of shamelessly plugging those in. This program is being recorded and will be available on our YouTube page. If you have any questions about our programming, please visit CrestedButteMuseum.com. You can visit us on Facebook, Instagram, or sign up for our newsletter. Also, definitely want to thank our sponsors for this whole program. Without them, we could not do it. Western Colorado University Foundation, Bill Petros, and then also Bud Bush from Bluebird Realty. So thank you so much to our sponsors. And we'll have time for questions at the end of the talk.
Thank you, Ashley. And thanks everybody for being on. This is our last podcast on Colorado history, as Ashley has mentioned, but on January the 20th, 7 o'clock, starting Thursday evenings, I'll have 11 or 12 sessions on the history of Crested Butte and the surrounding area, another podcast and the same routine. I also want to thank all of you for being on. We've got 303 people registered, and you've been very generous with your donations. And I hope that some of you will consider donating to the Crested Butte Museum, CrestedButteMuseum.com, or to my scholarship, which will benefit a lot of needy kids in the Gunnison country, and to go to westernup.org. On December 21, we do have that polka party with Pete Dunda.
It's actually December 28th.
December 28th. I changed my date there, Ashley, when you said it.
I know, so I'm sorry.
That's okay. December 28th, polka party at the museum. It ought to be a gala affair, and I'm looking forward to it. Tonight, we got 40 photos that we're going to selectively toss in every minute and a half or so on various areas in Colorado, because the topic tonight is Colorado in the 20th century. And as usual, we're going to have a trivia question at the end. And this time, I'm going to raffle off my big book called The Gunnison Country 400-pager to the person who is first to answer the trivia question. So Ashley will fill you in on exactly what to do after I'm finished. So here we go. Colorado in the 20th century. Colorado did enter the 20th century when the clock struck 12 at January the 1st, 1900, in a bad way. 3 disasters had hit the state 10 years earlier, and recovery had been very slow. Those 3 disasters, Ashley, I think that's the last one. We got to go to, remember, we're going from the bottom part there with, I think the Brown Palace is number 1, champ. There we go. The 3 disasters were, number 1, the collapse of the cattle industry after the terrible winter of 1886 and 87. And then the silver panic of 1893, which shut down every silver mining camp in the state. And then the last thing was a lingering drought, which began in 1890 that caused the collapse of farming in eastern Colorado. However, right after the turn of the century, 2 federal agencies were created, and both would have a big and positive effect on Colorado. The first one was the creation of the Bureau of Reclamation, and the other one was the start of the United States Forest Service. The Bureau of Reclamation built its first project in Colorado when they completed the Gunnison Tunnel on the western slope in 1909, with President William Howard Taft coming over and throwing the switch to start the water flowing. The Gunnison Tunnel was 6 miles long under Vernal Mesa and brought water into the Uncompahgre Valley for irrigation, and it saved the towns of Montrose, Olathe, and Delta. The first Bureau of Reclamation project in history on a national level. The creation of the Forest Service around the same time brought 10 national forests to Colorado, and they were the Pike, Gunnison, White River, Roosevelt, San Juan, San Isabel, Rio Grande, Arapahoe, Route, and Uncompahgre. The Forest Service began a great conservation movement into Colorado. Gone were the days of overgrazing, clear cutting of timber, and problems involved with mining. The federal government now regulated the national forest with a program called multiple use. Everybody could use the forest, but they'd have to pay and also be regulated. One of the first forest rangers in Colorado was William Kreitzer of the Gunnison National Forest, and he had to deal with a great cattle and sheep conflict in the Gunnison country, and eventually had a great book written about him by Len Shoemaker, and it's entitled Saga of a Forest Ranger. Mount Kreitzer around Tin Cup is named for him today. Colorado was also affected by the progressive movement, a great liberal era which began in 1894 and ran until 1917 nationally. The nation and state had just come out of the Gilded Age, one of the most corrupt eras in American history, 1865 to 1894. Corruption with the robber barons, big business domination with monopolies, the problems of Reconstruction, nativism, which said that the only good people were the WASPs, white, Anglo-Saxon Protestants. And then, of course, you also had the tremendous conservatism that existed during that time. Two of the greatest progressives in Colorado were Judge Ben Lindsay and Emily Griffith. Lindsay became famous for his juvenile courts. He believed that youthful offenders should not be put in prison with hardened criminals. As a result, reformatories began, such as the one currently in Buena Vista today. Emily Griffith is one of the greatest women in Colorado history. She started opportunity schools for older and non-traditional students who had to work during the day. Her classes were at night, and they taught foreign languages to newly arrived immigrants, along with practical skills which would lead to jobs. The juvenile courts and opportunity schools went national and international. And then during the progressive movement, 4 amendments to the US Constitution were approved. The 16th Amendment began the graduated income tax. The more you made, the more you paid. The 17th involved the direct election of senators. Now the people and not state legislature would pick senators. The 18th involved the prohibition of liquor nationally, but Colorado had already passed a prohibition law a few years earlier in 1916. And the final amendment was the women's rights. The 19th allowed women to vote nationally in elections for the first time. Other progressive reforms came to Colorado. Home rule for Denver, along with the recall initiative and the referendum. The times, as Bob Dylan would say later, were a-changin'. And then came World War I, which began in 1914 in Europe, with the US getting involved 3 years later in 1917. And that ended the progressive era and brought about a conservative reaction. Just before the entry of the US into the war, Colorado got 2 national parks, Mesa Verde in the southwestern part of the state in 1906, and Rocky Mountain National Park, 405 square miles between Grand Lake and Estes Park in 1915. Enos Mills, who had climbed Long's Peak 272 times and who lived in the park, was its father. Later on in 1932, they built Trail Ridge Road from Grand Lake to Estes Park, right through Rocky Mountain National Park, 48 miles long, 11 miles of the road above 11,000 feet, 4,000 above 12,000 feet. And today, Rocky Mountain National Park is the #1 tourist attraction in Colorado, with 3.5 million people visiting it every year. In 1912, due to the efforts of an eccentric man named John Otto, Colorado National Monument opened just outside of Grand Junction. To help Colorado get out of tough economic times, the famous Mineral Palace at Pueblo had opened in 1890, calling attention to Colorado's mineral wealth. It had 25 domes, statues of King Coal and Queen Silver, along with mineral exhibits. 5 years later, not to be outdone, the Leadville Ice Palace opened, covering 5 acres with ice walls 50 feet high and 8 feet thick. Inside was a ballroom, a skating rink, exhibits, and carnival displays, and outside was a toboggan run. Both the Mineral Palace and the Ice Palace wanted to draw people back into Colorado. In 1895, the Festival of Mountain and Plain began, the predecessor to the state fair of today. That included street dancing, a silver ball, rock drilling, rodeo and bicycle racing, and one time an exhausted guest named Chauncey Depew declared, I get my exercise acting as pallbearers to my friends who do in the Festival of Mountain and Plain. And then coming into Colorado in the 1870s was a fellow by the name of Adolf Coors. He was born in Prussia, later Germany, in 1847. Came in Colorado in 1872, working on the railroad. 2 years later, he and a friend started the Golden Brewery. And then when he bought his friend out in the 1880s, he began Coors Brewery in Golden. By 1897, the brewery included a 7-story skyscraper, 75 employees. From a start in which deliveries were made in wheelbarrows to the bars in Golden and in kegs thrown over pack saddles going to mining camps. Today, Coors employs 9,000 people and markets beer in every state in the nation. Last year, it had sales of $5 billion, a tremendous end, not an end, but ongoing to that very innocent start started by Adolf Coors a long time ago. Colorado also got new colleges after 1900. Colorado State College at Greeley, Colorado State Normal School in Gunnison, a Catholic college, the Sacred Heart, which later became Regis University. Many changes came to Colorado when World War I began. 43,000 men and women went to war. 1,009 didn't return. Agriculture and mining boomed during the war. Farmers tripled their acreage because of world need, and prices soared. 3 minerals boomed in Colorado because they all were hardeners of steel, badly needed during the conflict. Molybdenum came from the Climax mine on Fremont Pass, 11 miles north of Leadville, and became the largest such mine in the world, producing 72% of the world's supply of moly. Vanadium was mined in the Paradox Valley, not far from Nucla, and a soon-to-be-named town of Uravan, URA for uranium and VAN for vanadium. And then tungsten was mined in Boulder County. That hardener of steel jumped in value from $9 a unit before the war to $93 a unit during the war. When World War ended in 1918, Colorado spent the next 2 decades in an economic depression. The 1920s was a decade of Republican rule, nativism, isolationism, a belief in the gospel of wealth. That is, God favored those with money. With little demand for food or minerals worldwide, with the war now ended, farmers and miners went into a depression because they had overexpanded and they now couldn't pay off their mortgages or loans. Railroads shut down with little to carry. Industry came to a halt. The young and the few that were wealthy followed the advice of the great writer Edna St. Vincent Millay, who said of the 1920s, "My candle burns at both ends. It will not last the night. But ah, my friends and oh, my foes, it gives off such a wondrous light." Some followed the view of a gangster Al Capone. His advice was, live fast, die young, and have a good-looking corpse. One of the worst features of the 1920s in Colorado and the nation was the revival and the supremacy of the Ku Klux Klan. The Klan revived after one of the first movies, The Birth of a Nation, came out, and Woodrow Wilson had it shown in the White House. It glorified the Klan. The Klan was anti-Black, anti-immigrant, anti-Jew, and anti-Catholic. They advocated the supremacy of the white race. In Colorado and the nation during the 1920s, one couldn't have been elected dog catcher without being in the Klan or having Klan support. Under the leadership of the Grand Dragon, Dr. John Locke of Denver, the Klan helped elect Governor Clarence Morley and Mayor Ben Stapleton of Denver and controlled the General Assembly. It also tried to pass 2 bills in the legislature, one to prohibit the use of wine in Catholic sacraments and the other to require all students to go to public schools. Crosses were burned on Lookout Mountain and Golden and all over the state, including in Crested Butte and Gunnison. Finally, and fortunately, by the late 1920s, the Klan began to fade because of courageous newspaper editors who exposed their foul deeds and because leaders were now indicted on income tax evasion. The great writer H.L. Mencken described the Klan perfectly. He said, "It gave the village idiot a chance to dress up in white sheets and a hood and engage in hocus pocus." In 1922, the famous Colorado River Compact was signed, with the 7 states on the Colorado River deciding amongst themselves how much each state would get. That ended expensive lawsuits, which had solved nothing. The compact divided the states between the upper and lower basins, with the dividing line at Lee's Ferry, at the site of Page, Arizona today. The upper basin states agreed to allow 7.5 million acre-feet of water to go by Lee's Ferry every year. The year before, in 1921, one of the worst floods in Colorado history occurred. On June the 3rd in that year, after 3 days of heavy rain in the mountains and warm weather which caused snowpack to melt in the mountains, the Arkansas River became a raging torrent. It smashed into Pueblo, wiping out 600 homes, killed over 100 people, caused millions of dollars in damages. The Colorado legislature right after failed to vote relief money for Pueblo because that town had not supported 3 tunnels, railroad tunnels that northern Colorado wanted for the lines to run through. Those were the Moffett Tunnel under Rollins Pass in the north, a Marshall Pass Tunnel around Poncha Springs, and the Cumbres Tunnel in the south. A deal was struck. Pueblo would support the Moffett Tunnel, with the other 2 excluded, and the legislature voted funds to rebuild Pueblo. The Moffett Tunnel was built from 1922 to 28 for $18 million. 29 men died building it. The tunnel was 6.2 miles long under Rollins Pass and eliminated 23 miles of track and cut grades to 2%. And Amtrak uses the Moffett Tunnel today. Other significant events came in the 1920s. Denver Municipal Airport opened in 1929, renamed Stapleton 1944. Colorado's first oil well blew in Canyon City in 1862, only 3 years after the first one in the nation at Titusville, Pennsylvania in 1869. It was followed by oil wells at Florence, Boulder, Wellington, and then the largest of them all at Rangeley in northwestern Colorado. On November the 21st, 1927, a violent strike came at Rocky Mountain Fuel Company's Columbine Mine at Lafayette. 6 miners were killed. Martial law was declared, and the militia was brought in. Out of this violence came one of the great women in Colorado history, Josephine Roach. When her father died in 1927, she inherited his ownership of Rocky Mountain Fuel. Roach was a graduate of Vassar and Columbia University, became the first lady officer in the Denver Police Department, then became a progressive, later on vice president of Rocky Mountain Fuel, and now the head of the company. As the head of the company, following her father's death, she recognized the right of miners to organize a union. When other members of the governing board of Rocky Mountain Fuel opposed this, she bought them out and recognized the union. The miners at Rocky Mountain Fuel now turned out more coal per miner than any other company in the state. They now had an incentive to do just that. Josephine Roach ran on to run for governor under the campaign slogan of Roosevelt, Roach, and Recovery. She didn't make it, and later on died in 1975 at the age of 92. In October of 1929, the stock market crashed. sending the U.S. and Colorado into the worst depression in the nation's history. 3 years later, in 1932, President Herbert Hoover, who many blame for the depression, was beaten by New York Governor Franklin Roosevelt in the 32 election. When Roosevelt took office on March the 4th, 1933, he announced the New Deal, a massive federal program to get the nation out of the Depression. He also ended prohibition by getting the 21st Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. Now one could get a cold beer, leading to the great song, "Happy Days Are Here Again." Roosevelt took over at one of the first economic times in history, and added to that was the Dust Bowl of the 1930s. Because of land that shouldn't have been plowed, a long drought, and high winds, farms blew away in eastern Colorado and the Great Plains. The Dust Bowl led the great writer John Steinbeck to write a book called The Grapes of Wrath, about poor farmers leaving their homes and heading out to the West Coast. It also led the great singer Woody Guthrie to write a song that probably should be our national anthem today. And that song is "This Land Is Your Land." And he also wrote another appropriate song, "So Long It's Been Good to Know You." Things were so bad that the writer Sinclair Lewis wrote, "It Can't Happen Here," showing that a dictatorship was possible in the U.S. Then in 1934 came the Taylor Grazing Act, and that act took 800 acres out of public land, and it took it out of being used without regulation. The land was arid, alkaline, had been abused for many years by overgrazing, clear cutting of timber, and mining wastes. Ed Taylor, the 4th District Congressman from the Western Slope, the head of the House Interior and Insular Affairs Committee, got the land, the act through his committee, and appointed Farrington Carpenter of Hayden as his head. Now, I had a chance to visit with Farrington Carpenter 4 times in the 1980s, and Carpenter told me a great story about what happened. He said he knew he was going to have some real problems over who was going to get grazing rights under the Taylor Grazing Act, so he called a meeting in Glenwood Springs, and he made it known that anybody who didn't attend probably wasn't going to get a permit. And all the sheepmen and cattlemen had to show up. And Farrington Carpenter had a table, a bunch of tables in a circle. And he had nameplates with cattlemen sitting next to sheepmen and vice versa, so they all couldn't sit together. And he said, "Fellas, I've been instructed by the federal government to answer 2 questions tonight. One I think we can answer in 17 seconds. The other may take a little longer. Number 1 question. The federal government has asked me to tell you people that if we don't decide amongst ourselves tonight who is going to get what in grazing permits, the federal government will do it. All in favor of the federal government, raise your hand," and not one hand went up. And Carpenter said, "Okay, we've taken care of the first question. Now let's get to work." Today, the Taylor Grazing Act is called the Bureau of Land Management and has been very successful in conserving the land. One of Franklin Roosevelt's federal programs was the Civilian Conservation Corps, which had a big impact on Colorado, with camps of young men between 17 and 23 getting $1 a day to live outside in tents and plant trees, build check dams, build roads, and dig ditches. 6 million of them worked nationally. 30,000 worked out of 40 camps in Colorado. There's no need to tell anybody why that group in the 1930s, men and women, later on would be called the greatest generation. It was one of the great conservation programs ever in Colorado. In the Gunnison country, there were camps in Juanita and up Cement Creek where they helped build the Pioneer ski area. With Front Range population going up, that area in the 1930s needed more water. And during the 30s, the first two great trans-mountain diversions took place. The first was the Moffett Tunnel, a 6-mile underground tunnel, water tunnel, beneath Rollins Pass, paralleling the railroad tunnel, which had been built a decade earlier. That took water out of the Fraser River in Middle Park on the western slope and brought it out to Rollinsville on the eastern slope. The second diversion was the granddaddy of them all, the Colorado Big Thompson Project, which took water out of the Colorado River near Grand Lake and ran it underground through a 13.3-mile Alva Adams tunnel, right under Rocky Mountain National Park and into Estes Park, Lake Estes, and then down the Big Thompson River for use in irrigation. The diversions were a harbinger of things to come. Today, there are 38 diversions in Colorado, taking 500,000 acre-feet from the western slope to the eastern slope. During the Depression 1930s, 39% of all farms in Colorado were tenant farms, not owned by the people farming them. Industrial plants like the CF&I shut down. Most railroads went into bankruptcy, and many people lived hand to mouth. The Moffett Broad Gauge Railroad, which had been built by David Moffett from Denver to Craig in 1913, now joined the Denver and Rio Grande, which ran to Grand Junction by a 41-mile branch called the Dot Zero Cutoff in 1935. That unique cutoff ran from McCoy down to Dot Zero on the Colorado River just west of Eagle. It was called Dot Zero because it was the 0 milepost of the branch, hence Dot Zero. And it ran 41 miles to just outside of McCoy to the north, in a little place called Orestad, which is Dot Zero spelled backwards, 41-mile branch. Other important things came in the 1930s and the 1920s. Adams State, Trinidad, Mesa, Pueblo, Fort Lewis, and Lamar all got junior colleges. Radio came to Colorado, and by 1940, there were 15 stations in the state. And then came World War II with the bombing of Pearl Harbor on December the 7th of that year. That would be one of the 3 most significant years in Colorado history, ranking with the gold rush of 1859 and the silver panic of 1893. Colorado would never be the same because of the war. 2 major themes came as a result of World War II. One was men and women going off to war. 139,000 did from Colorado. 2,700 died. Rationing books, victory gardens, giving blood, and shortages were all part of the home front, where everybody pulled together to support the troops. The second involved was wartime industry and military bases in the state. The Denver Steel Yards, the Colorado Fuel and Iron Company, and the Denver Arms Plant, which produced arms with 20,000 workers there in Denver, were only some of the industries. The Rocky Mountain Arsenal, a chemical warfare plant, employed 15,000 people and was another. Military bases multiplied. Lowry Air Force Base, Buckley Naval Base, the Pueblo Army Depot, Peterson Airfield in Colorado Springs, which trained heavy bombardier groups, Fort Carson, which included 60,000 acres near Colorado Springs and trained 110,000 men, and Camp Hale, located off Tennessee Pass, which trained the 10th Mountain Ski Troops, were other bases. During the war, Colorado's population rose by 200,000, with the Denver metro area accounting for 78% of the increase. Many who came to work in Colorado or were in the military made promises to themselves to come back and live here after the war. When the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor, Japanese American citizens of the United States, were moved out of California into 9 relocation centers across the nation. One was Camp Amache, located near Grenada, near the Arkansas River in southeast Colorado. One courageous Colorado governor opposed this as un-American, and that was Republican Governor Ralph Carr, who served from 1939 to 43. Against public opinion, Carr declared that, quote, an American citizen of Japanese American descent has the same rights as any other citizen. In Colorado, he'll have full protection. Carr was right, but his stand cost him his political career. When World War II ended, the Cold War, a non-shooting war of ideology between the US and Russia came, with both sides having nuclear weapons. In Colorado and the West, as a result of the Cold War, a great uranium mining boom occurred from 1948 to 62. Uranium mines were located around Nucla and Uravan in the Paradox Valley, all in western Colorado. Grand Junction became the center for the uranium boom, with 100 companies headquartered there. The Atomic Energy Commission was behind the mining. The mining boom resembled the silver gold boom of the 1880s. The only problem was, and difference was, that miners did not have a pick, a pan, and a shovel like they used to. Now they use Jeeps, Geiger counters, and airplanes as they search for uranium. Uranium mills came in Gunnison, Durango, Canyon City, Grand Junction, Rifle, and Uravan, with the tremendous hazards of radiation not known then. Finally, in 1963, the Nuclear Test Ban Treaty was signed between the US and Russia and other countries, and the boom came to an end. Other mining activities that continued in Colorado after the war. Climax leveled Bartlett Mountain on Fremont Pass, and as I mentioned earlier, produced 72% of the world's supply of the metal, about $105 million a year. Coal mining got to an all-time high in 1943. And even after the war, Colorado was one of the top coal states in the nation, with mines in Crested Butte, Somerset, Trinidad, and in northwestern Colorado around Craig. The production of oil jumped from 1.7 million barrels a year in 1940 to 23.4 million barrels of oil in 1949, with most coming from the Rangeley oil field. And then, in 1954, the Air Force Academy was created, north of Colorado Springs at 7,900 feet. First graduating class in 1959. The Air Force in Colorado Springs beat out Alton, Illinois, and Geneva, Wisconsin. And it was the third service academy, along with West Point and Annapolis. Also in the 1950s, because Ed Johnson, our governor, was a good friend of Dwight Eisenhower, the president, Colorado got an interstate highway, I-70, which ultimately would be moved through the Eisenhower and Johnson tunnels. In 1956, the Upper Colorado River Storage Act was passed, led by Western Slope Congressman Wayne Aspinall. That act created 6 dams in the upper basin states, 3 on the Gunnison River, Blue Mesa, Morro Point, and Crystal, Flaming Gorge on the Green River in Wyoming, Glen Canyon at Lee's Ferry, and the Navajo Dam near Farmington, New Mexico. The dams would hold water for lower basin use later in the year. And then in 1965, came one of the worst floods in Colorado history, the South Platte flood of that year. $4.1 billion damaged, one of the top 3 worst natural disasters in Colorado history. Occurred from June the 14th to the 16th in 1965. After the flood, Denver did a lot of work on the river, including building Chatfield Dam, 147 feet high by 1975. Colorado began electing governors for 4 years, starting in 1962, instead of 2 years prior to that time. And then it elected 3 in a row for 4-year terms, and each won 3 elections in a row. John Love, a Republican, Dick Lamb, a Democrat, and Roy Romer, a Democrat. By 1970, 74% of Colorado's population lived on the Front Range in a megalopolis, with one city running into another. Fort Collins, Greeley, Denver and all the suburbs, Colorado Springs, and Pueblo. In 1972, Colorado turned down the 1976 Olympic Games by a voting margin of 3-2, primarily for environmental reasons. In 1973, the Eisenhower Tunnel was filled on I-70, eliminating the dangerous trip over Loveland Pass. The parallel Johnson Tunnel, which handled traffic going west to east, was finished 6 years later in 1979. In the 1970s, underground nuclear blasts to free underground natural gas were set off. Operation Rulison near Grand Valley, Operation Rio Blanco near Meeker. They were stopped because of environmental concerns. Beginning with the Denver Broncos in the 1960s, Colorado got the Big Four professional sports teams: Colorado Rockies in baseball, Colorado Avalanche in hockey, and the Denver Nuggets in basketball, bringing huge stadiums and much publicity for the state. Other significant events in the last 50 years included 2 more Trans Mountain water diversions: the Roberts Tunnel, taking water out of the Dillon Reservoir, and the Frying Pan, Arkansas project, diverting water from the Frying Pan to the Arkansas River. And then one of the other great natural disasters in Colorado, the Big Thompson flood, August 1, 1976, 100 years to the day of Colorado becoming a state. 11 inches of rain falling near Estes Park and in the Big Thompson Canyon. A roaring avalanche of river down the Big Thompson, taking out the towns of Drake and Grand Haven and killing 143 people. One of the greatest disasters ever to hit the state. And then there was the failure to build the Two Forks Dam near Deckers, turned down by the EPA in 1989. The ski industry began to be big business in Colorado in the 60s and 70s. Crested Butte, Vail, Copper Mountain, Keystone, Beaver Creek, and Breckenridge, all starting after 1960, and joining areas of earlier years like Aspen, Monarch, Wolf Creek, Winter Park, and Berthoud Pass. Today, there are 27 in Colorado, and Colorado skiing is a multi-million-dollar business. But now, what of Colorado today, 2021? 5.5 million people living in the state. Water, a tremendous problem, and going to get worse with climate change. Colorado, however, has great resources, great mineral wealth, oil and coal, 35% of the land owned by the federal government, and $400 million of gold coming out of Cripple Creek every year from the Crescent Mine. Tourism, the second largest industry in the state, with people flocking in to ski, ride mountain bikes, get out to hot springs, ride the railroads, visit the parks, and see the incredible scenery of the Rocky Mountains. Our major problem today in Colorado involves too many people, too much growth, not enough water, and major environmental concerns. So Colorado today is at a crossroads, and very difficult decisions await in the future. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is Colorado 1900 to the present. Ashley will now come on and tell everybody how to answer the trivia question, which I'll give momentarily. So Ashley is back on with a little picture of herself. There we go. So you're on, Ashley.
Yeah, so just put your answer in the chat box and I will see who put it in first. So I might have to scroll. So,
and then we'll have any questions or comments. So here, ladies and gentlemen, is for the big book on the Gunnison country, the trivia question. First come, first serve. Name the two great Colorado progressives, one of whom started juvenile courts and the other who started opportunity schools, both adopted nationally and worldwide. I want the names of those two great progressives for the book. Who got first?
Lindsay and Griffith, is that it?
Lindsay and Griffith is it.
So that is Darcy.
Darcy Schlichting. Darcy, you're going to give your email to Ashley. Congratulations. And now, folks, time for any questions or comments. As we finish things off here on my 11th episode, remember, January the 20th, we're going to be on the history of Crested Butte with photos, 7 o'clock to 8 o'clock. And we'll probably have about 20, 25 people in person. And of course, consider making a donation to the Crested Butte Museum, crested.butte.com, or to my scholarship, aiding some kids who need it. And that is westernup.org. What is the title of the big book and where can I get it? Well, it's called The Gunnison Country. And the best way to get it is go to the Western State Bookstore or to B&B Printers in Gunnison. Just hit them online. I'll give you the number of B&B Printers. It's 970-641-2672. Yeah, thank you, Brenda. Thanks, Jack. Good to have you on board again. Doug, thanks very much. Yeah, I know there's a lot of controversial topics coming. Yeah, Patricia, thanks for being on board, and I'll see you again on January the 20th. Any other questions or comments, folks? Great to have 303 of you registered and on board. I really appreciate that.
305.
305. Yeah, thanks, Robbie. Yeah, Doug, thank you very much. Thanks, Keith. Mark, thanks very much. Lisa, thank you. Vicki, thanks very much. Yeah, thank you, Judy. Thank you, Tempe. Thank you, Kimberly. Yeah, Mark, thank you. I hope you got your book. I sent it out to you. And don't forget about the polka party, December 28th, Crested Butte Museum, 4 to 6. Pete Dunda. Yeah, Jennifer, absolutely she did. And she is getting money from the scholarships, you bet. Yeah, thank you, Jennifer. Kathy, thank you. Barbara, thank you. Yeah, that's right, Barbara. If you want to get the Gunnison Country book, it's sold at the museum. So just see Ashley. She'll tell you how to get it.
Just come in the front door on Friday through Mondays. And then
or email crested.butte.com.
Yep.
Any other comments or questions, folks? Again, really appreciate all of you being on board. You've been great. And I've been very happy to do this. It's been a lot of fun. One last time, any questions or comments? If not, yep, Melinda, thank you. Melinda is the head honcho at the museum and a hell of a dancer.
She is. I think her and Becky are definitely, I haven't seen Anna Marie dance the polka yet, but I'm sure
Ashley's working on the polka.
I'm working on it.
Thank you, Mark. All right, folks, this is Vandenbusche over and out. I hope to see everybody on January the 20th or in Crested Butte at the museum skiing or at the polka party on the 28th. Ashley, thank you very much for all your great help. Melinda, thank you. And thank everybody on board. Over and out.
Bye.